Welcome inside episode 590 of the Locked On Senators podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Pillar, up in the Blue Mountains. Ross Levitan not with me today. I'll be driving the bus from here on out. Maybe a bit of a bumpy ride, so hold on. But Ross will be with me in our interview with today's guest, Chris Peters from Daily Faceoff and the Talking Hockey Sens podcast. Chris tells us all about the 2022 NHL Draft, why he has Logan Cooley as his number one ranked prospect instead of Shane Wright, a couple of Winnipeg Ice prospects the Sens may be interested in, and a whole lot more in today's episode of the Locked On Senators podcast. And let's begin that episode. Here we go.
Locked On Senators, your daily podcast on the Ottawa Senators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Today is Tuesday, June 28th. Thank you for making the Locked On Senators podcast your first listen or watch of the day. We're available wherever you get your podcasts on Apple, Spotify, or you can watch me right on YouTube. If you want to support the show, please give us a like with a thumbs up, subscribe, and you can be a daily listener to the Locked On Senators podcast. And if you listened to yesterday's episode, you were in for a real treat because you got to see our live reaction to the greatest Ottawa Senator of all time, Daniel Alfredsson, being inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame. It is about time. We've been working hard to get him into the Hockey Hall of Fame, and now number 11 is in there where he belongs. Big shout out to everyone that tweeted hashtag Alfie to the Hall, the Alfie to the Hall social media page. I believe the movement was a big reason why this made the timing right for Daniel Alfredsson to get into the Hockey Hall of Fame. I'm still riding that high. It feels great to be a Sens fan, even though it's already happened. There's been 24 hours to digest it. Who cares? Keep celebrating it. It's a beautiful thing to finally have Alfie in the Hall of Fame. Now, we're going to keep these episodes fairly shorter than we usually do. We typically go on a little bit too long, but we planned out this week that Ross is going to be away to have interviews so you guys can get prepped for the 2022 NHL Draft, as if we haven't covered it enough already, but we're still not done. We've got more. And Chris Peters from Daily Faceoff was one of my favorite interviews we did. We had a lot of fun chatting with him. We talked about some Winnipeg Ice prospects, some guys in Ross's backyard, and we talked about why he has Logan Cooley as his top-ranked guy, and he makes a couple really good arguments. Although, does he think that the Montreal Canadiens will go off the board and not select Shane Wright first overall in Montreal with their fans in attendance? Maybe not. We'll see, but you can listen for yourself in our interview coming up with Chris Peters. But before we get to that interview, we got to tell you all about our friends over at BetOnline.net, guys. Sure, basketball's over. Congrats to the Golden State Warriors. Hockey's over. Congrats to the Colorado Avalanche. But there's still lots of action to get in on in the sports gambling world. And if you're going to do that, the trusted online sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network is BetOnline.net. They've got all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land. BetOnline.net is the number one spot for all your sports betting needs, guys. It's the best spot for your sports scores, podcasts, news, updates, whatever you need, they got it. And there's more than just basketball and hockey, like I mentioned. There's golf, there's baseball, there's boxing, there's UFC. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. Guys, it's betonline.net where the game starts. And now let's start our interview with Daily Faceoff's Chris Peters.
All right, we now welcome on a very special guest. You can find his work over at Daily Faceoff. He's a prospect analyst and a man brave enough to go against the consensus at the top of his 2022 draft rankings. Chris Peters, welcome to Locked On Senators. How are you doing today, man?
Ross, I'm doing real well. It's great to be with you guys today. Certainly looking forward to the draft. I mean, it's talking about it a lot lately. So I feel like I'm repeating myself on a daily basis, but I'm trying to give the Sens sicko something nice today. I'm going to try to give him something good, something new. I've always been a fan of the Sens fandom. So I like that. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, and even more reason to welcome you into Locked On Senators. Are you going to be boots on the ground in La Belle Provence on July 7th and 8th?
I am not actually. So I have a little bit of awkward timing in terms of be switching jobs soon. I'll still be in the prospect space, but basically I've got some new things that I got to get squared away for the new job. And so I'll be covering the draft from home. It really sucks that I won't be there. It's great to cover live. Actually, for what I do, it's typically easier to do it from home as I found the last two. But at the same time, back when I was at ESPN, it would just be me and my editor sitting right next to me, which was like such a great way to do it when you're at the draft. And so, yeah, but unfortunately this time it really sucks too, because I've actually never been to Montreal. I've been in Quebec. I've been throughout Canada, but I've never been in Montreal, which is, obviously shocking if you work in hockey, and
Montreal in the summer is incredible.
I know. Like I was super excited about it, but the way things worked out, unless something drastic changes in the next couple of days, like I haven't canceled my hotel yet. So we'll see. Maybe I'll just say, okay, I'll do it myself. But yeah, I don't know. Things are just a little bit, timing just isn't quite working out the way that I'd like it to.
Yeah, very fair. Well, if you want to keep that hotel room, maybe Pillsy could get a bit better of an experience than his last trip to Montreal.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, I got to see a 5-1 loss for the Sens, and it was not so fun. So the draft at least would have some better times for the Sens. Hopefully.
There's going to be some intrigue to this draft class, though. Before we dive into it with you, Chris, what's your overall impression of this group?
It's okay. I think that's kind of the general feel. It's like, for the most part, an average draft class, there's nothing real special. The top is kind of shaken up enough. I don't think any one of I basically have three guys in the top of my draft, and that's, Cooley, Wright, Slavkovsky. Is any one of those guys going to be a franchise defining player? I'm not sure. I think Cooley has the most potential to be a superstar in that group of that trio. But I mean, there's certainly the chance that Shane Wright rebounds a little bit more. Like his progression is kind of stalled a little bit relative to where he started. And then you've got Slavkovsky, who didn't have the full body of work, like his club games and his club production, not at the level that you would expect of a top pick. But then you see what he did in the international tournaments. It's hard to ignore even if you say it's a small sample or whatever, he's basically professional hockey, and he was his team's best player. So, there's something to that there. So I just think it's going to be one of those drafts where, if you're in the top 16 or so, I think you feel real good about it. You feel like you're going to land a guy that's going to be an impact prospect for your organization. But, it's harder to find those guys that you say, yep, he's going to be a superstar. This guy is going to be legit. This guy is going to be, everything that they want him to be. I just think there are enough guys in this class where it's like, yep, there's this thing that's amazing. There's this thing that's not at all good. That's kind of where we're at with this class. And that's just been my sense this year. And yeah, so it doesn't sound exciting to put it that way, but it's still, you're going to find good value throughout this draft. And there are always guys that develop into something that we didn't quite expect from every single draft year.
Yeah. And you mentioned how there's three guys at the top of this draft for you. And the consensus is Shane Wright will be the top guy. We've had a couple people say Slavkovsky could get the mix in there as a top guy, but you're the only one I've seen that's gone the third alternate route with Logan Cooley as your top choice. And maybe this is just a smart marketing ploy on your part, Chris Peters, because then everyone wants to hear, okay, why are you saying something different? And then you can just kind of get your marketing and exposure out there. But having said that, it's obviously working. We got to hear your explanation for why Logan Cooley is your top guy. And through reading your rankings, I tend to agree with some of the points you made.
Yeah. So just to get the first part out of the way, because obviously I got that a lot. You're looking for clicks, you're looking for attention. This job is like everything I do in this field, there's a public record of it, yep. So there's actually some amount of accountability to what happens. I mean, like the first year I did this, just full disclosure, the first year I did this, I was at CBS Sports, where I did a top 60 draft ranking there. And didn't have the resources or the travel or anything else that I would normally have. I did go to the under 18 Worlds that year because I was doing it for another company. And so, I was starting to see all these different things, and I had Seth Jones 1, Jonathan Drouin 2, and Nathan McKinnon 3. How bad does that look now? So that's my first draft, but that's obviously, you learn from those things.
Sure.
So now I've got 10 years of experience under my belt, and I spend too much time in the rinks and too much time watching video to just basically be careless with this. I have more tools at my disposal than I've ever had before. And so I want to make sure that whatever that, produces is what I really think.
Yep.
I had Logan Cooley at number 1 at the midterm as well.
Yep.
And that was, I think at that point, Shane Wright hadn't really had great production to that point in time. It did improve a bit over time, but it's still not top tier production. It's not, and you can say the same thing about Logan Cooley and Uri Slafkovsky, because Cooley is like, I think 15th or 14th or so in the all-time scoring list for points per game at the National Team Development Program in a single season in his draft season. So like Jack Hughes had just ridiculous numbers, broke all kinds of records. Austin Matthews, same thing. Cole Caulfield, same thing. But I think Cooley's like, I'll produce guys like Trevor Zegras in that as well. So the reason, now that that's out of the way, the reason that I had Logan Cooley number 1 is I think that he's the most dynamic player in this draft. I think that he has the highest ceiling of any player in this draft. And while I believe that Shane Wright is the safe pick, has the highest floor, the guy that's probably, you could step into the NHL and handle himself quite well and be a good player and probably have a great career.
Yeah, I'm sure the Habs will develop him well.
Yeah.
As they do with young centers. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. They're going to have to hope that they make the right changes around there. Although, Martin St. Louis, we'll see. I liked what he did for their young guys this year, but
for sure.
But anyway, so you say, okay, well, of these 3 guys, the guy that I think has the biggest chance to be a franchise player is Logan Cooley, because of the speed that he plays at, the skill that he has. He's the most dynamic player in this draft, because he's not just dynamic, he's also, his hockey sense is comparable to Shane Wright's. He processes the game as fast as he plays it, which is really hard to do. And only, there are a lot of fast guys, but there are a lot of guys that don't process the game at that speed. And so they don't play as fast as their speed would allow them to. And Logan Cooley is one of those guys where that hands, feet, brain are all working at the same time. And Shane Wright's more of that deliberate, he's not slow, but it's a deliberate pace where he's, trying to pick defenses apart. Logan Cooley's more like, boom, this is what I'm doing. I'm doing it 100 miles an hour. And in the end, even though, he's only about 2 inches shorter than Shane Wright, it's not like there's a huge size difference. He's not, there's been a lot made about Shane Wright's defensive ability. I think that Logan Cooley's is comparable in that regard. He doesn't get as much credit for it because he does a lot of the flashy stuff, but boy, does he ever compete in his own zone. And, I think that's actually true of a lot of those national team guys. They played under Adam Nightingale, who just moved on to become the head coach at Michigan State. He really got those guys to play well away from the puck. I thought they were so detailed in their play off the puck, and that's something that Logan Cooley has. So you put all of that together and you say, yes, Shane Wright is excellent. I think he has the best hockey sense in the draft. But I think that Logan Cooley simply does more. And that's why ultimately he got chosen over Shane Wright, and Shane Wright's number 2 on the board.
I appreciate that rundown. That being said, do you believe it will be still on July 7th, Shane Wright, first overall?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's really, when you're picking first overall, it's hard enough. The pressure is on in such a way.
Especially when the draft is in your home
Exactly.
stadium.
When you're picking first overall with a crowd in front of you, with basically the visceral reaction is going to be immediate.
Yeah. Looking up at the banner saying the first team to ever finish 32nd overall in the National Hockey League.
Yeah, exactly. And every team, every team too, or every fan has been conditioned, not every fan, but a lot of fans have been conditioned to believe that Shane Wright is the best player in this class.
Yeah.
Even though the consensus has been dwindling throughout the entire season. And publicly he's number one because yes, he's the safe pick. And I'll say I've been since that mistake with the Nathan McKinnon thing that I did my first year that I do this ring, I got way more conservative at the top. And this year I felt like this is not the year to be conservative. This is the year to go for it. This is the year to find that player that's going to be I'll be honest. I think between those two players, if you want to play the style that Martin St. Louis had that team playing in the end, I think the guy you want is Logan Cooley.
Yeah, it makes a lot more sense.
But I think it's really difficult to pass up a Canadian who has exceptional status, a guy who, has played for Canada. He's worn the jersey in multiple events, and will be at the World Juniors, assuming whoever drafts him lets him go.
Right.
We'll have an opportunity to continue to build that case. That's really hard to pass up in favor of the flashy American or the big high upside Slovakian who, torched a couple tournaments. So I think this is the defining moment of Kent Hughes's career.
Yep.
Already.
And it's not even his first, it's his first draft. And this is the most important decision he's going to make in the next couple of years here is right now. So I think you almost have to expect some amount of conservatism there when that's there. And that's what I think it would be. I think that Shane Wright is, I wouldn't begrudge them for picking him. I have him number 2. It's not like there's a big difference between him and Logan Cooley for me. So I wouldn't criticize them for doing that.
That's very fair. Just a quick anecdote. I want to ask more about the U.S. program. You're obviously based in the States, but speaking of a draft at home, like I just think back to 08 in Ottawa, they trade up. Daniel Alfredson goes up. Like there's no bigger moment. And they did not take the safe pick. They took a 150-pound defenseman named Erik Karlsson, and it worked out pretty well. So sometimes a move on draft day that doesn't seem like it makes a whole lot of sense ultimately becomes that. So we're going to be interested in following that Logan Cooley state throughout and see where he does end up. But he obviously had some help. This was a great year for the U.S. national team program. Maybe not the same number of like Zegras, Hughes that year, but still lots of great players. I'm focused in on Cutter Gauthier, especially at 7th overall. It seems like he's got a lot of the intangibles that the Sens look for, but he's also got a ton of skill. First, do you see him as a center or a winger? Because I know he kind of named himself a center at the Combine.
I think he's got all the skills to be a center. The fact that the reason that he was a wing is because you had Logan Cooley and Frank Nazar, and they were, and for a good chunk of the season when Charlie Stramel was out, who's a 6'5" center, and draft eligible next year. All right, he was out for a lot of the season. So Gauthier ended up playing down the lineup a little bit in order to get that. But when he moved back up to wing, it just opened up his scoring ability a lot more. I think that he's really sure-handed. He's got the size, he's got speed, he's got physicality. I think, I think the Sens would be thrilled if he dropped there. I'm not sure he's going to get past 6 based on the way that things are trending in this draft. He's been one of the biggest risers. I've heard of teams having him as early as 3rd on the board. Whoa. There are teams that I think have him as, that in the conversation, not as a number 1, but in the conversation for the top of their board because of that upside. He has, I personally think Logan Cooley has the highest ceiling, but I know there are a lot of people out there that think Cutter Gauthier is the one with the highest ceiling because he has the size, athleticism package, has the hockey sense, plays both sides of the puck, is very committed in all zones. And I think that the best skill that he had, one of his best skills is what he does, I think, better than anybody else in this draft, is he doesn't have like that dangle puck skill. But when the puck is on his stick, it is almost impossible to get it off of him. When he shields it incredibly well. He's very strong on the puck. He's strong on his stick. So it's hard to stick check him. It's hard to, get for him to like handle bad passes. Like he can handle it. You can't give him a bad pass. And he's also got a pretty large pass radius as well. So his handles, while not like dynamic, like I'm going to dangle through a defenseman, he has some of the best hands in the draft because it's so hard to get it off of him. And so on top of that, with a great release, I think he'd be a goal scoring center with, good defensive capabilities, and a guy that I think, he's going to Boston College. I think you want him to sit there maybe 2 years, let him get to that. I don't think he's going to dominate college hockey next year, but I think by year 2, he'll be a dominant player in that ranks. And so the upside is phenomenal for him. And that's why I think that he's got a chance to go. The Sens might not even have a chance to get him. But if they do, I think that would be a very fair pick there.
Well, you mentioned the industry talking about how he's rising. Same with yours. You had him going from 18 all the way up to 6 to your final ranking. So the late risers, we know the Sens love that. Jake Sanderson certainly fit that bill the way he flew up draft boards once the season was paused. But the Sens are going to have lots of options at 7. Hey, Pilsy, you got a couple of guys you wanted to bring up.
Yeah, I mean, Cutter Gauthier, he's our guy. We've done a couple mock drafts, and he's the guy we have the Sens picking at 7. But I do agree, it's quite possible that he's not going to be there, and Columbus will take him. So who are some of the other options? I've got a couple wingers in mind that I would look at for the Sens, but who do you think would be the best fit for the Sens at 7, if let's assume Gauthier is not available there?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I'm Ottawa, I want to just continue down this track of getting more dynamic up front,
yes.
That's what you have. Obviously last year they went Braun over skill in a Tyler Boucher, and I think I still like the player. I think he's going to be fine. It was 10
right
was
player,
too high,
wrong spot. I am as
exactly.
a 5-star. We did our draft profiles. I was like 5-star. I want him so bad at 39 or 40.
Yeah, exactly. So that's and that matters, and obviously that changes the expectation level for him and everything else. So I think in the range that they're in, you have all sorts of options. Maybe one of the top 2 defensemen slip, but you don't really. That's not where you want to go. You obviously have Jake Sanderson coming. You have all these different things, but still, I think either of those 2 defensemen to get a right shot of that quality, if either of them slips to the Sens,
would be amazing.
I think you have to go that way. But if not, I'm sure some of the wingers that you've talked about, Jonathan Lekkerimäki,
Kemmel?
Joakim Kemmel. You've got Frank Nazar he's an undersized center. He doesn't really fit the Sens profile necessarily, but he's one of those guys where it's like, he makes a lot of sense. He could play center, could play wing, really dynamic and speedy. But Lekkerimäki and Kemmel, those are the 2 guys that you say, okay, well, they've got great shots, playmaking ability, they skate well, they have decent enough size. Although Kemmel measured in 2 inches shorter than he's been all season. So
we noticed that.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on there.
Is he
doesn't look 5'9". He doesn't look he might have been. He's
carrying his team. He's got a little bit of
losing a couple of vertebrae or something like that. So but those guys have dynamic skill sets, and the upside that they have, it's they could be high scores. I think they fit that Tim Stützle model of that speed shot combo that can really make a huge difference for your team and be a top 6 guys. So, they make a lot of sense there. I think I'll be very fascinated to see, with how hard they went size last year, do they entertain the idea of Connor Geekie at that high? Now, I have Connor Geekie a lot lower than most people do. It is based entirely on skating. I like the player a great deal. I think that he's going to be an NHL player. I think, the skating is what keeps him out of the top 10 and closer to the end of the top 20 for me. But he is a 6'3" big center, highly intelligent, physical, can make plays. It's just, if the way that the Sens have operated in the last little bit, he could be a guy there. But I think that the dynamic skill set that they saw, the Sens had a huge contingent at the under-18 Worlds. Kemmel and Lekkerimäki were both there, and I'm sure left very strong impressions on, everybody was there from Pierre on down. So I'm sure they left a really strong impression on that group.
Well, I've got a little insider info for you then too. I live in Winnipeg, and I was at Ice versus Oil Kings game 1. I turn around, there's Pierre Dorion scouting that game, and I didn't think it was Connor Geekie's best game, but I probably got 5 or 6 live viewings, and you see the same thing. He looks so awkward when he's skating, but you look at the potential when he does have the puck on his stick. You mentioned with Gauthier, it's hard to get off. Well, Geekie can have it on a string too, and it's tough. I left every Ice game I went to this year, I left either thinking Tyler Benson was the best player on the team, again, not even eligible this year. Yeah. But I always look back and Geekie impressed me more than Savoie. What is it about Savoie that scouts are still so high on, despite the 5'9" frame? Is he that dynamic?
I mean, he's dynamic enough. I think like in that range, especially, I don't think anybody really views him as being a center at the next level.
Right.
There just aren't 5'9" centers in the NHL. There are 5'10" centers, and like that's why Logan Cooley is, like that 1 inch, I guess it matters. But
it's like we always talk about the photo of Muggsy Bogues and Shaq. And it's like how NHL teams view people, and it's like
yes.
5'9" versus 5'10".
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think that the skating is at a high level. The compete is there. I think he's definitely lower and sinking on a lot of lists. I think there's concerns about his ability to stay healthy. I think there's some concerns about, can he play his style at his size and stay healthy? And then also, based on the relative to the rest of the class, it's not like I think Matthew Savoie started declining. I think that it was more the rest of the class kind of grew around him and really stepped up, because he was a guy I was super high on at the midterm. The other thing that is there too, I mean, like, scouts will say, oh, we don't look at points that much. They look at points a ton. And they should. And I mean, it's a great indicator of how a player is doing, right? Especially if you say this guy, if he doesn't produce it in junior, it's very hard for him to produce as a pro. And he produced this year. I think he produced at a level that was, comparable, if not better than most of the top guys in this class. Granted, he did it on one of the best teams in the CHL. But still, it's, you still say, okay, well, he was a driver for that team. And I think that there's a lot of people that still very much like him. Will he go in the top 10? I kind of doubt it at this point. But it's certainly still a possibility.
Yeah, he's an interesting one for sure. And the Sens, they do have some picks in the second round. We're still waiting to see where that Tampa pick will end up being that they have for them. Good. Yeah, it's probably going to be at the very bottom here. But they do have their own second round pick, which is at 39th overall. Now, who would be some options that you think would make sense for the Sens in that spot there? Personally, for me, I have the Sens kind of going for a forward with 7th overall pick. So I've kind of slated the pick 39 to probably be a defenseman, but maybe you have some ideas of what would make sense and what players would be available in that range.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that range is so tricky. Like, the late first, early second is really hard to predict and handicap, in terms of who's going to be there. That's what everybody's trying to do. Excuse me. I would say that with where the Sens are going to be, there's a lot of options. There's, if you're saying, okay, who are some guys that'll be there kind of from the tail end of the first round guys. So like Matthias Havelit, an undersized defenseman from Sweden who had a great under 18 world championship. I think he could slip outside of the first round. I don't think he should go much lower than the high second round. He's an option there. There's the off chance that maybe a Noah Ostlund, who is his center, bit on the smaller side, slighter build. He had such a really good U18s that I bumped him up to a first round grade from, basically thinking he was a high second round pick. Really like the way that he played, but like that's another option of a guy that could be there. And then you've got kind of some of your guys that are really good players, really good junior players, maybe not as dynamic, like an Owen Beck from Mississauga. I mean, there's a good chance he goes in the late first. Danny Zhilkin from the Guelph Storm as well. He's got skill. I think there's upside there. I don't think he's lived up to his full potential yet. Reed Schaefer, who just had a long run with Seattle. He needs to improve his skating a little bit more, but it's not bad. It's just like, I think that if he can get a little bit of a step, he's got a chance to be a real good offensive player, really good shot. He does a lot of things well. That's another guy that's trended towards the end of that first round. And then, as far as defensemen go, I think one of the guys that could be there, Seamus Casey from the national team program, really good skater, in that solid enough defensively. I think that his hockey sense, his offensive sense, I would like them to see if Finnish plays more. He got a lot of ice time on top power play units and things like that. So he has the skill, he has the skating ability. But he's one of those guys where he kind of feels like he's that second, first round tweener where it's like, there's so many tools, but there's just enough to doubt that maybe he, is available in there. And then I would also say like Tristan Luneau as well from Gatineau, being an option as kind of like that two-way defenseman. I thought that the offensive skill that he has is adequate. Like it's not amazing, but it's effective. Maybe that's a fit too. So that's the kind of player, I mean, generally that you might find in that range. But I think it's so hard to say at this point, because once you get really past, I'd say 20, it's just like, could be anybody. 20 to 60 could be, what I
the
have
rankings could be out the window at that point.
It could be what I have in reverse, or whatever.
Honestly.
Like that's the way it feels right now.
Yeah.
Well, Chris Peters is a NHL Draft and Prospects analyst. You can find his work at Daily Faceoff, and go listen to the Hockey Sense Talking Hockey Sense podcast. I just listened to the one with Corey Pryman, who's also coming up here on Locked On Senators. Fantastic conversation you two had, both guys without Shane Wright at the top of the draft. Now, final question for me, Chris, and it would be crazy for me not to bring up the only Nodak commit and a guy who I'm sure you know from the USHL. When would be too early to take Dylan James?
I would say, I think high second is still early. I think he's more of a third round guy.
Okay, so Tampa's second.
Yeah.
Tampa's second rounder.
Yeah, Tampa's second rounder would be probably be he'd be in the mix at least.
All right.
A great season. So yeah, good call. Always keep an eye on those North Dakota boys. And Cole Spicer was once committed. Maybe they can get him later in the draft and just say there's he's from Grand Forks actually. Okay. So there's the
decommit. They're kind of dead to me. Like I said that about Scott Morrow, and then he goes out and has an unbelievable B+ 1 year.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
That's the best place to watch a game in college hockey, though. Do you agree?
Where's that, at Grand Forks?
At the Ralph.
Yeah, for sure.
Unbelievable. Go. Awesome. Well, maybe we'll see you there down the road, Chris. Always appreciate this. Maybe after the draft, love to have you back on. Maybe focus more on the Sens prospect pool and how you think they did at the draft. But we appreciate it. We look forward to your coverage in early July.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, guys. It was a pleasure to do it.
All right, Sens fans, that was our interview with Chris Peters. Hope you enjoyed our chat with him. We're definitely going to have him back on the podcast, as he had a lot of great insight and was a lot of fun to chat with. And maybe we'll have him back on later in the summer once the Sens have their draft pick selected. He can tell us all about why the Sens made a great pick or a poor pick, how these players are going to fit into the system, and we can get into a whole bunch of topics with Chris, as it was great to chat with him. I don't have much more for today. I'm still riding the high of Alfie being in the Hall. That's probably going to be the only news for a while. Hopefully, we get some RFA signed, Josh Norris maybe to a long-term deal, or honestly, if the Sens could just sprinkle some sort of news to keep me going throughout the week, that would be great. But we still have a lot of great interviews lined up for you guys throughout the rest of the week and throughout the time that Ross is away. So if you liked our interview with Chris Peters, buckle up. There's a lot more draft coverage from a lot of respected names in the industry, friends of the show, some recurring guests even. So definitely keep an eye out on our YouTube page. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. Be a friend. Tell a friend about the Locked On Senators podcast. And also, I just want to mention the mock draft that we did. That was so much time, so much effort, so much scheduling to get done. We were so nervous. Are people going to like this? We're making a 4-hour-long YouTube video, and the amount of support we've received from fans, people commenting, people quote tweeting, saying just really kind words about all the work we put in, and we really appreciate hearing all of that, because this was a bonus thing. Like, we just decided, hey, people like the mock draft. We're going to do it. If we're going to do it, let's do it right. Let's get the best guests in. Who cares about time restraints? Although usually we're not too worried about time restraints on this show anyways, but 4 hours, that's a feature film. That's not a podcast. So we did something a little different, that's for sure. But we had a lot of fun doing it, and it seemed like you guys really enjoyed it. So I think that's something we're going to be doing, maybe an annual tradition. We'll have a massive feature film for the mock draft going forward here. But for today, I say goodbye. Thank you for listening and watching the Locked On Senators podcast, your team every day.